Moving to the next sort of stage of specification, you're moving now into the transmission and the chassis options, and this is the point at which you decide whether you want a manual or a PDK, the dual clutch sort of automatic transmission. And in this case, I went with the manual. I've always had manuals. It's part of the attraction with driving Porsches. I've done a lot of training, and I feel like I can operate a manual car pretty well. And it's a little bit traditionalist in a way. It's obviously more of an enthusiast choice. The PDK is amazing. It makes the car faster, 0 to 100 times quicker, more fuel efficient, really rapid gear changes, but to my mind it just takes away from the driving enjoyment. So I stuck with the manual, and I gave away a little bit of performance, but I'm not racing the car, and I don't think the extra tenth of a second in terms of 0 to 100 is something I would notice in any case. So I didn't feel like I was losing anything. I was just gaining a car that I could engage with a whole lot more. So there's a few other options in this sort of category in terms of transmission and chassis, some expensive things that I left out. There's torque vectoring, there's rear wheel steering, there's a lift system, which could be handy, but I didn't select it. There's a Porsche dynamic chassis control, which I'm sure works well to sort of keep the car even more flat around corners, but I don't think that's an inherent issue with the 911 in the first place. Like the chassis and the suspension keeps the car tracking around corners really well, and I think there's probably a bit of an artificial sort of thing going on with that PDCC option. I'm sure it's expensive, and I just steered away from it. I picked the Sport Chrono package, which gives the clock on the dashboard. The biggest feature of the Sport Chrono is actually in tandem with PDK. It gives a launch control. So with the manual, there's a little bit of irrelevancy there without launch control, but it does give some features alongside that, which I thought was worthwhile. One of them being throttle blipping on downshifts or automatically. I can obviously heel and tow, but you can set the car to Sport Plus and have the car blip on the downshifts automatically for you, which is kind of nice. And the car's computer system, does it rev matches perfectly every time. There's also some dynamic engine mounts, which just help sort of balance the engine under load. So for those couple of reasons, plus some lap timing sort of modes through the Porsche communications management system when you're doing track days, is of minimal benefit, but it's a feature. So I went with that. And then finally, under this sort of category, I picked a sports exhaust. There's been a lot said on the internet with and more broadly, but amongst reviewers and journalists and various commentators on the turbocharged engine, that the noise is really lacking, and somehow a whole bunch of the character of the 911's been lost. So I guess on the back of that, I was keen to get the sports exhaust to sort of maximise the sound of the engine. I've had sports exhaust in the past on the Boxster. It was great, and I had it on a GT3 as well. So that sort of oral quality of the engine and the experience in 911 is really important. It's a huge part of the character of the car and the enjoyment of the car. There's sometimes you just turn the radio off and just absorb the noises that it's making, and certainly when you're driving on a track or in a spirited fashion, the sound that the engine is making is a big part of your engagement with the car and understanding what it's doing, and you know, whether you're sort of in the optimal sort of power band of the car. So, but you know, it really contributes to the experience. So, sort of coming back to the start, with this sort of commentary from journalists and other reviewers, I'd have to say I think they're totally over exaggerating on the sound issue. I think it's more marginal than they make it out to be. I'm not sure why they're sort of pushing that barrow so hard and sort of trying to defend the legacy of naturally aspirated engines so hard. Porsche's been making turbocharged engines for a long time, and maybe the sound is a bit muted, but the sound is just different. It's not even just the fact that it's muted. It's got other qualities to the sound, sort of whirring and whooshing sounds that come from the turbos, and I think the car makes plenty of noise, and it's far from a quiet engine. So yeah, the sports exhaust just adds to that, and yeah, I just think it's a total fallacy, some of the criticisms that are being levelled at the turbocharged engine from a sound perspective. So following that, I'm sort of moving towards the end of the you know, the various categories for selecting parts of the car. There's a whole bunch of interior options, and I didn't pick many things from this category. There's a little thing called the smoking package, which I picked. It just puts a lid on a receptacle in the center console. It just sort of cleans up the whole presentation of the center console. And yeah, I didn't buy it because I'm a smoker. It's just a visual thing. I put some mats in the car. There was a little net, a storage net that's a free option that I just ticked because it's easy to do. And then I avoided a lot of other things. I had some crests embossed on the headrests of the seats, and yeah, I avoided a lot of other things, mainly because they're expensive, but also most of them are, from my opinion, relatively tasteless. There's just some garish trims that you can add to the car, you know, colours to various dials. Deviated stitching could be good, but I had sort of forfeited the whole sort of leather package. I've got leather seats, but you know, there's limited leather in my car. There's some particularly bad things like mahogany steering wheels, and some of the carbon fibre trims could be quite good, but yeah, they're obviously cosmetic. They're not really doing anything for weight saving. There's yeah, I think if you're balancing up the weight saving between a certain plastic trim versus a piece of carbon fibre, it's got to be pretty negligible. So yeah, and then there's other sort of things where you can bring the colour of the car inside, and yeah, sort of looking on the configurators. In some of those instances, if you'd picked a Miami blue car or a yellow car or a red car, it gets pretty gaudy. So so I avoided all of those particular options, and as I said, they're pretty pricey as well, and I didn't place any value on them. So sort of rounding out under the audio communications sort of section, with Australian cars, they're actually pretty well spec'd in this sense. The cars are expensive here as compared to other markets in the world, and you know, North America and Europe in particular. So they get spec'd up, and so we sort of get the PCM system standard and navigation, and the Bose sound system is standard for the cars delivered here. So I just stuck with that. There's an option for a Burmester system. I'm sure it's amazing, but it's a big hike in price, and the Bose is perfectly good. So so that kind of, you know, rounds out the whole specification. I'm adding some video footage to this this clip that I've created, so you can see the car from the inside and the outside. You can appreciate the classic nature of it that I've achieved, and yeah, I think I've managed to create a car for me that I'm really happy with. I think it suits my enthusiast perspective. I think it's quite pure in its form. It's the closest 911, closest new 911 to the original concept. So it avoids a lot of distractions, and yeah, I'm really happy with it. And maybe it's a bit of a coincidence, but I was really going for a driver-focused car, and the manual gearbox was a big part of that. But it's also about the simplicity of it, and it's kind of interesting that the Carrera T has popped up in the last few months. It's been launched. I don't think any have been delivered here yet, but that obviously follows on the back of some of the more landmark cars in recent times, which have been following the trends or the wishes of the enthusiast customers, sort of crying out for manual driver-focused cars off the back of GT3s only being available in PDK a little while back. So then we got the 911R. They didn't make many of them. Their values were high to start with, and then they've become a speculator's dream, going for crazy prices, and they're basically inaccessible to regular people, other than the super wealthy. So, and then there's obviously GT3s and GT3 RSs. GT3's just been announced with, or is now available with a manual gearbox, which is a good thing for some purchasers. But then the T has recently come out, which is basically a base Carrera with, very similar specifications to the car that I've got. It's got a couple of other small features which I'm a little bit envious of. Like a slightly lower suspension system, a limited slip differential, but otherwise it's more or less follows the mantra and the sort of the specifications that I've picked. So I think I got there with a driver focused car, and it just happens to be the simplest version of a 911. So yeah, I think it you can do quite well, and with the base model, 370 horsepower, 450 newton meters of torque, which comes in at 1500 RPM or something along those lines. So the power delivery is great. The torque is all there from low down. It revs. It still revs well. It's not quite as high as the naturally aspirated engines, but they've really, Porsche and their engineers have managed to sort of maintain the linear qualities of a naturally aspirated engine through a turbocharged one. So the small turbos on the Carrera just seem to work really well in sort of giving that driving quality. So so this video's gone on for a while now. It's actually you start talking and time gets away from you. So I think I'll wrap it up there. I'll talk about some other topics another time. I'm going to need to edit this down a little bit so it's not quite so long. But thanks for listening, and look forward to presenting something again soon. See ya.